everyone. We're so happy that you are here. Welcome to this evening's virtual event with Laura Davis. My name is Carell Centers, and I'm the events director here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, where I'm broadcasting live. And we are just so thrilled to have everyone here with us in the event tonight. We've been counting down to this moment. So thank you so much for being here. Today, we are thrilled to celebrate the release of The Burning Light of Two Stars. And tonight we're going to hear from Laura on the process of writing and publishing her new book. And she'll also be reading 3 short pieces from the book. We will be premiering an exclusive slideshow that will give you a sneak peek at the characters that you'll read about in The Burning Light of Two Stars. And towards the end of the evening tonight, we will have questions from the audience as well, which you can submit anytime under the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So you can also connect with one another on the bottom of your screen there via the chat window. We love to hear where people are joining us from, what your relationship to our author's work is. So you're welcome to pop some messages in there if you want to create a sense of community there. I do want to remind everyone that by joining this event, you are agreeing to refrain from engaging in any inappropriate behavior and harassment of any kind. So thank you for your respectful engagement. This event is being recorded so that you can rewatch it if you miss anything or have to leave early, and we will send out that link shortly after the event. We'll send that out tomorrow so that you can have access to the event recording. This is a friendly reminder that your purchase of the book tonight supports local jobs and independent culture and shows the publishers that our audience here in Santa Cruz is invested and engaged. So thank you so much for your purchase. We will be providing links for you to easily purchase the book in the chat if you don't already have your wonderful signed copy from Laura Davis. We do have some great events coming down the line. Things are still virtual for the remainder of the year, but we do hope to come back with in-person events next year. But in the meantime, we have Misty Copeland coming on November 4th for a ticketed virtual event. And we also have at the end of the month, Claire Oshetsky, who's a local author. She's going to be in conversation with Rachel Yoder, and that will be on November 30th. So please join us. Check out the rest of our calendar. There's some good stuff coming up. But now on to the main attraction. Laura Davis is the author of several nonfiction books, including the best-selling The Courage to Heal, as well as the Courage to Heal workbook, Becoming the Parent You Want to Be, and I Thought We'd Never Speak Again. Her groundbreaking books have been translated into 11 languages and sold more than 1.8 million copies. In the course of Laura's career as a communicator, she has also worked as a columnist, talk show host, radio reporter, radio producer, blogger, editor, and speaker. Laura leads writing workshops in Santa Cruz, the US, and internationally that focus on writing as a tool for healing and transformation. And we are just absolutely thrilled to welcome Laura Davis to our screens tonight to celebrate The Burning Light of Two Stars. Thank you so much for being here, Laura.
I like just appearing like that.
Magic.
Kind of like magic.
Yeah, it's delightful. Well, imagine the applause, if we were all together in one space, but people are cheering from home. And welcome to the screen. I'm so glad that you're here. So let's just dive right into it. This is your 7th book, your first book in 19 years. How is it feeling to be here today?
It feels really amazing. I just actually started to cry when I looked at the names in the chat. I mean, there was Keith Rand I knew from 4th grade. And just, people from all different parts of my life here. And, it's hard to know what to say because this book has been gestating for over 10 years. And it feels like really coming full circle from the first book, The Courage to Heal. This feels like it's completing a circuit. And I feel that kind of, electric energy and buzz of excitement that this book, which has lived inside of me for so long and that I struggled to write, is now finding its readers. And there's nothing for an author like people reading their work. And it's like that completes the circuit. So I'm super happy to be here tonight. Wow. And there's nothing like a hometown crowd. And I love even better that it's on Zoom and people could come from all over.
Totally. That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. So this is your first memoir, and it covers some of the same themes that you've addressed in your earlier books: sexual abuse and healing, estrangement and reconciliation, repairing damaged relationships, and even parenting. And I'm wondering what makes this book different.
Well, for people who are familiar with The Courage to Heal, I consider this book the prequel and the sequel. And it's really about what happened afterwards. So it's the rest of the story. And my prior books were all how-tos. So they were, information books about how to heal from sexual abuse, how to heal an estranged relationship, how to parent and find your own philosophy as a parent. So they were teaching books, and this is a memoir, so it's very different. It's a story, and it's my personal story. And the primary purpose of this book is not to inform, it's to entertain, it's to touch people's hearts, and it's to inspire. I think the other thing that's different is I'm older, so I have a very different perspective on the issues I write about, and particularly my relationship with my mother, who I have written about before, but in this book, I'm seeing it from a much more seasoned place, and so that makes a really big difference.
Mm, yeah. Wow. Well, speaking of seasoning, you've been teaching writing here in Santa Cruz and around the world for more than 20 years. But you have said you had to learn new skills as a writer in order to pull off this book. And what are some of the new things you had to learn?
Well, I spent a lot of time when I was working on this book believing I wasn't capable as a writer, that I didn't have the chops, I didn't have the skills. And so I had to learn a lot of new things because I had never written a full length, book length story before. So, and with memoir, one of the biggest challenges is what to put in and what to leave out. You don't just write about your entire life. What was this book going to be about? And it could have been aimed in a lot of different directions. So I wrestled with that for a period of years. I had to learn, how do you create a propulsive narrative? How do you write something that makes people have to keep turning the pages and read the book? I mean, just in the last few days since the book's been shipped, I've gotten so many messages from people saying, I got your book, I got in the bathtub, and 4 hours later I got out and my fingers were all wrinkled. So that's like music to my ears, that I achieved what I wanted of creating a page turner of a memoir. I had to learn how to pace the book. I had to learn how to create three-dimensional characters, really rich characters that were complicated, complex, and imperfect. I had to learn how to completely let go of one draft and let it be the mulch for the next draft. And also, the book was way too long. So in the writing business, they call that killing your darlings. I had to be willing to cut scenes and sentences that I loved, and let them go. And then the other thing was how to craft an inciting incident, because in every story, if you watch TV or movies or read books, there's something that kicks the story into being, that sets off the conflict. And that's actually the first thing I would like to read, is the inciting incident for this book. So this scene that I'm going to read, it takes place right after I completed a ritual in my backyard, which was saying goodbye to my year of breast cancer treatment. And I write that I was opening up to whatever comes next and looking forward to a time and space to recover with no more toxic surprises. And then this is the next scene. Chapter 2, The Call. 2 hours after my ceremony, I tasted my homemade tomato sauce simmering on the stove, added basil and oregano, a generous pinch of salt, a splash of red wine. Karen was picking up the kids on her way home from teaching reading at Watsonville High. They'd be home in half an hour. I was about to drop a handful of spaghetti into a pot of boiling water when the phone rang. It was my mother in New Jersey. We were due for a call. We hadn't spoken in several weeks. Cradling the phone between my neck and shoulder, I dropped the pasta into the pot, stirred to separate the strands. My glasses fogged with steam. I imagined her smoking parliaments, curled up with an Afghan on the couch in the den. She'd probably just gotten home from her poetry class, or her Shakespeare class, or her Course in Miracles study group. I could never track her schedule. I set the timer for 15 minutes. Lori, I've got a surprise for you. Oh, yeah? I was only half listening, maybe a quarter. I opened the fridge, rooted around for salad fixings. Why don't you guess? I don't know, Mom. What's the surprise? Don't you want to guess? I pictured her lighting another cigarette, residue of the day's lipstick reddening the tip. Uh, you went to an audition and got a part in a play? No, I'm afraid my acting days are over. Guess again. Just tell me, Mom. Are you sure you want to know? Of course, I want to know. Darling, I've finally made up my mind. She paused for effect. I'm moving to Santa Cruz. I wanted you to be the first to know. Blood rushed from my head. I closed the refrigerator, leaned back against the door. Pictures of the kids and little square art magnets clattered to the floor. It's true, in a moment of generosity years earlier, I had invited Mom to move out to California when she got old. We talked about it once or twice, but I never thought she'd actually take me up on it. It had been 10 years. It just feels like the right time, Lori. New Jersey just isn't the same anymore. That's right. Your friends are dying off, going into assisted living, or moving to be close to their children. Oh my God, that's me. My hand tightened on the phone. My mother and I had been estranged for years. Yes, we'd forged a shaky peace, but 3,000 miles still separated us for a reason. Our reconciliation only went so far. I love Santa Cruz and I love your family. Wow, Mom, that's amazing. I mean, great. I'm so happy. Well, that's good, darling, because I met with the real estate agent today. I've put my condo on the market. She says it's the perfect place to sell a house at the shore. I collapsed into one of the red, cushy chairs at our yellow Formica kitchen table, stared at the black and white checkered linoleum. The floor needed a washing. Lori, are you there? Yeah, Mom, I'm here. You still want me, don't you? Of course I want you. We all want you. It's just that I never thought you'd actually do it. Well, I'm not getting any younger. No, she wasn't. Mom was 80 years old, and her memory was failing. You don't sound very excited. I am excited. I'm just surprised, that's all. How could I possibly be excited? The woman who'd betrayed me at the worst moment of my life was moving to my town, and I was the one who'd invited her. A beep reverberated in my head and wouldn't stop. Mom was talking about escrow and how hard it was going to be to pack, but I barely heard her. She was the white noise in the background. I was hovering outside my body, listening to just one voice, the one screaming in my head and taking up every inch of bandwidth. I finally gotten through cancer, and now this? Why the hell didn't you ask me? How about, Lori, do you remember that conversation we had 10 years ago? I've been thinking about it more seriously, and I wonder if you think it would be a good idea for you, for me, for us, for Karen and the kids. Or how about, Lori, I know you're just getting over cancer. Is this a good time for me to move across the country to live in your town? My friends told me about this gorgeous mobile home park right at the beach in Santa Cruz. De Anza. Have you heard of it? Yes, Mom. I'll go right from one ocean to the other. So you'll stop by and talk to the manager? Sure. Happy to do that for you. I grabbed a brand new yellow legal pad. It had been months since I'd made a list. what would I have put on it? Take toxic drugs, throw up, smoke pot so you could eat, grow white blood cells, watch West Wing reruns, survive? As I wrote Find Mom a Place to Live, Dianza, on the pristine yellow page, Mom said, Gotta run, darling. I promised your Aunt Ruth a call tonight. Hung up on me. The timer was still beeping. I looked into the pot. The spaghetti had congealed into a gelatinous mush. I dumped it in the compost and set a fresh pot of water to boil. As I lifted the heavy pot, I knocked my favorite glass off the counter, and it shattered on the floor. The kids were going to walk in at any moment, and they'd be starving. I swept up the shards and set the table for four, but I couldn't remember which side the fork was supposed to go on.
Thank you so much for that incredible reading. It was so engaging, and just the way you use the imagery, I'm just right there with you at every moment. So thank you so much. So it took you 10 years to write The Burning Light of Two Stars. And after all that time, how did you know when you were actually done? You could have tinkered forever.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And, the first draft of this book, I tried to write it as a play because my mother was an actor, and that was a failed attempt. Then I tried to write it as a book of letters, and people said they felt like they were on the outside of a private conversation between me and my mother. And then I started writing it as narrative, and I used a lot of what we call beta readers, which basically means I had people read the book and comment on it. And some of them, I hit up my writing students, and then I would ask them, do you know anyone who doesn't know anything about me who could read this book? My family members who were in the book, they all read it and commented on it. And over the course of the 10 years, I actually had like 120 beta readers. And at first, in the early drafts, they would say like, "Oh my God, your mother, I would never want a mother like her," or something like that. And I knew when they said that I had a long way to go because I did not want to write a book where I was the hero and my mother was the villain. And so I had to really work to soften my portrayal of her and bring out more of her very positive qualities because it was really easy for me to harp on and focus on the negative qualities. And I also had to make myself much more vulnerable and really show my own underbelly. And I knew I had succeeded when I sent out the final draft for the last group of readers. I got back feedback, things like, when I was on this page, I hated you and loved your mother. And when I was on this page, I loved your mother. Oh, other way. I loved you and hated your mother. And when I started getting that feedback, that's how I knew the book was finished, that I had really achieved creating two very human, flawed characters, these two larger than life characters. That's the burning light of two stars. We are the two stars, really butting heads with each other, these very strong personalities. So that's how I knew I was finished.
That's great. So I think you're going to read us a section now, The End of the Wall. Is that right?
Yeah, and I chose this because I think this little section really demonstrates the trajectory of the protagonist, because it's a memoir, it's me. But really the challenge I faced as I went through this period of time. The book focuses really on the time from that phone call that I read until my mother's death. So it really is from her, her call and then her arrival in Santa Cruz until her death. And then there's a lot about the backstory because otherwise you wouldn't understand why we were so bitterly estranged. So this scene takes place when my mother is 80 years old. She's just moved 3,000 miles across the country to Santa Cruz. She's in the early stages of dementia. And I'm going through all the motions of being a good daughter. I'm doing all the right things in terms of activities. I'm being her advocate. I'm getting resources for her. I'm showing up. I'm taking her places. I'm fielding her endless phone calls. But In reality, my heart is still really closed off to her. And there's a certain distance and coldness. So it's like I'm doing it at arm's length. And one day she confronted me about this and about being cold. And so I wrote this afterwards. 3 decades earlier, I had erected an impenetrable wall between us, a fortress with narrow slits so I could watch her approach. I ensured that my defenses were prepared anytime she came near me. I always had an escape plan. It's true, we later reconciled, and the fact that we were able to create a functional relationship was a miracle. But it wasn't an intimate miracle because I never took down my wall. Oh, I taught myself to be kind to her in a fake it till you make it kind of way, but I still held her at bay. My wall just got subtler. It wasn't permeable. It was hard and opaque, and there was no door. We only met in the antechamber, the common room where guests are received. Only my polished self was on display, my masked self, and only in the antechamber. Mom never saw my inner sanctum, and I never saw hers. I got as close as I could within the constraints I had established, but closed is closed, and a closed heart is a lonely one. The price I paid to keep my mother out, at first with withdrawal, later with an armed fortress, and finally with the polite rules of détente, was love. The pure, unfettered love I longed for, the pure, unfettered love she craved. That day in the kitchen when I couldn't comfort her, I had to face it. My mother was still a stranger to me, with tentacles of need I was loath to touch. I wanted to be more than kind, to do more than merely what was right. I wanted to love my mother just once, freely and with the relief of a lost, exhausted child, beyond words and beyond all pretense. I wanted to lay my head on a place that was safe, just once, before it was too late. So, the what I hope the reader will take going through this is the question: did she do it? Was Laura able to get there? Was she able to finally make that heart connection with her mother? And I hope you'll be reading to discover that. And what was the trajectory of, from being so bitterly estranged as we were to this?
Mhm. Well, given that people can't put it down, I think you were successful in taking us with them along that journey. I think,
There's
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, there's one other thing I wanted to read, and it's from later in the book. And um, in the course of showing my family what I had written about them at different times, both my mother and my brother asked me when I went to them, and basically what I said was, uh, "Is there anything you can't live with?" I mean, I really wanted it to be extreme if they were going to ask me to change something. I mean, I had their basic buy-in, but that was my question. Is there anything you can't live with? And both of them asked me to say more nice things about them, to say more good things about them, which I found really touching. When you write a story, it's really easy to focus on the conflict because that's what makes a good story. But actually, there was a lot of good in my relationship with both my mother and my brother. And so um, my mother asked me, say more good things about me. And so this is one of those good things. Here's one. It happened in New Jersey when mom was still living in my childhood home. I was visiting from far away. I imagine myself in my early 20s. Maybe it was after I left the ashram at 21, when I had no idea what the rest of my life would be. Perhaps it was after I came out to her, when I was on my high horse spouting feminist philosophy, and she was certain I'd live out my life as a lonely lesbian in a seedy bar. The night before, Mom and I had agreed to call a truce on whatever conflagration was consuming us and to walk to the beach the next morning. After breakfast, we put on our windbreakers, laced up our sneakers, and headed out the front door toward the Atlantic. The moment we stepped out onto the crooked sidewalk, the sky opened as if God had decided that very moment to start the flood. Sunny one moment, a downpour the next. I gasped. She gasped. We were drenched in seconds, rain soaking our clothes, dripping from our noses, saturating our skin. Our socks and shoes, soggy white cotton in rubber soles. Mom yelled out, "It's raining cats and dogs!" I nodded, but could barely hear her. The rain was too loud. We looked at each other, each expecting the other to run back into the shelter of the house. Mom shouted through the rain, "Let's go anyway." I gaped at her. Did my mother really want to get drenched with me in the rain? As she looked at me expectantly, a huge, adventurous grin spread across her face. I'd never seen that look before. Her hair was stringy and wet, her cheeks painted with rivulets of rain, her dare unmistakable. I wanted to know this woman. "Yes," I shouted, grinning back. She put her arm in mine, and it felt like it belonged there. And together we turned away from the known world and the walls of my childhood home and ran out onto the soggy streets, our glasses streaked so much we couldn't see. Laughing, delighted, we strode out into the deluge. So that was one of the good moments, which I had forgotten, and I had to face that. One of the things that was challenging for me is I found this cache of letters from my mother after she died, and um, it included all the letters I had ever sent to her. It included all the letter copies of all the letters she had ever sent to me. And then there were the first drafts of letters she had never sent. So like the raw things that were never sent to me. And I had kept all of the same. And when I put all these things together, all of her letters and all of my letters, there was like, this big stack of letters. And I resisted reading them for a long time. And when I did read them, it was incredibly challenging. And this is one of the threads in the book is about these letters, because what happened was that the letters, the physical evidence, contradicted some of the stories that I'd been reciting avidly for many years. And so I had to face that I had created a story about my mother and it had truth in it, but it wasn't all of the truth, and that I had found it much easier to retain all of her mistakes and all of her betrayals, and I set those in stone. But her good qualities, they just went right through my fingers like water. And when I read these letters, and some of them were angry and hostile and very intense, and some of them were loving and generous. So I had to start to revise my version of our history. It was not as black and white as I had always claimed that it had been. So when I talked to Carell when we were planning this event, she said to me, "Well, Laura, you can't just read all the time like at a traditional book signing, and um, you really need to use the medium of Zoom more effectively. It's a video." So I decided to create a slideshow. And one of my very wonderful launch team members, Angela Washington, created this slideshow for me. And you're going to get to meet the characters in the book. I mean, the real, I always love when you're watching a movie or you're on TV, especially like a documentary, and then at the end they show the real person when they're doing the credits. I just always love that. So you're going to get a preview of the real people before you read the book. Most of you have not read it yet. So I'm gonna narrate this slideshow. I'm going to stop and start it, and I'm going to tell you some stories based on these images. Okay. As this begins, I want you to take note of this cover. I'll be talking about it later, but just the image on the cover. Um, this is my mother at 15 years old, graduating from high school. She was really smart and she skipped 2 grades and graduated from high school at 15. She grew up very poor on the Lower East Side of New York to immigrant parents. And she was the only member of her family to ever go to college. And she had to fight her father to go to college. He didn't believe in college, and he certainly didn't believe in it for a girl. But she fought him, and she ended up going to City College of New York, which was free. And she graduated at 19. And when she was 19, she entered a beauty contest. And this is her in the swimsuit competition. And when I was a little girl, there was a manila envelope that was always in a honored place in the living room in the bookcase. And about once a year, she would pull it out and we would look at these photos from this very special day. And my mother would light up. I knew that this was probably one of the most special days in her life because she ended up winning the competition. This is her being crowned. And the woman crowning her was Miss America at the time, Bess Meyerson. And those of you who are my age or older will know Bess Meyerson. She became a very ardent consumer advocate after her reign as Miss America. And this is my mother crowned at 19 years of age. And she, as part of her winning the contest, she was given a photo shoot. And these are some of the images from that photo shoot. These were the ones that we would look at together when I was a little girl. I just love that one. The other thing she got as a result of being campus queen is she was cast in her first play. She was cast as the ingenue in a play called The Hasty Heart. And her leading man was Donald Madden, who was a college student then, but he became a very famous Broadway star. And she always told me that she really sucked in that play. She didn't know anything about acting, and she said she was terrible, but she got the bug, and she acted in theater for the next 50 years. And I grew up with my mother in the theater, and this is her. This was the first play I was allowed to see because I was little. You know, my dad would stay home with me, and it was too late. And then her plays were usually serious subjects, and I couldn't sit still this long. But this was the first one I was allowed to see, and she's playing Elizabeth Proctor in The Crucible. When she was 40, she decided that she wanted to really try to make it in New York City as an actor. We grew up at the Jersey Shore. And so this was the professional headshot she had taken for her auditions. And this picture sat on my dad was a music teacher, so we had a lot of piano in our living room and probably every instrument you could imagine underneath in a case under the piano. And on the piano was this single picture of my mother, and she kept it up for decades. This is my father, Abe Davis. I just love this picture of him. He grew up in Long Branch, New Jersey, where I was raised. And then in World War II, he was a major in the Air Force. And when he came back from the war, he went to NYU in New York City to study music on the GI Bill. He met and courted my mother, and they married, and they lived in a little walk-up apartment in Greenwich Village where they were repeatedly robbed. My father became a communist, and my mother supported them by working as a social worker for the city of New York. This is me as a baby. And then we spent a lot of time at the beach at the Jersey Shore. This is me at 4 wearing a tutu. Second grade. This is 6th grade. I just love that paisley dress. a sign of the times. This is the picture I wanted to talk about when I said pay attention to the cover. This is the image that became the cover of the book. And I don't know how you are for remembering images, but the book cover jacket has some things missing from this picture. The curtains were photoshopped out. And then right here in the center is the New York Times uh, crossword puzzle in the Sunday magazine section. And my mother did the New York Times magazine, the New York Times crossword puzzle every day for over 50 years. Often with her friend Helen Satter from down the street. They would call each other, and if either one of them couldn't get a clue, they would help each other out because they had to finish it every day. My mother always did it in ink, never in pencil. And when we used this photo, the image of the newspaper got in the way of the lettering of the title, The Burning Light of Two Stars. And so it had to be photoshopped out. And I was really sad about that because her doing crossword puzzles is a meme that comes up over and over again in the memoir. And I really, at the end of her life, I was able to track her mental decline by her capability of doing the puzzle or not. This is it's hard to take pictures of an estranged relationship, but this is my mother and I. I was 25 when this picture was taken, and I was living in California. I always said in the old days, I used to say, I moved as far from her as I could without crossing an ocean. I felt like I needed to create that much distance to establish a separate self. And this was one of the very rare visits we had during that time. We met in Minneapolis, where some friends of hers lived. And this is kind of typical of photos of us. My mother is always in the front, um, and I'm always in the back. And she's got that big smile. And yeah, I mean, you can't really see, I'm not really smiling. And I remember behind those glasses, it was just like, do we have to pose for this picture? And now I notice she's touching and holding me, and I am not touching her. And I just really wanted to get away. This next image is us at the height of our estrangement. I believe that this photo was the first author photo I ever had. I think this was on the first edition of The Courage to Heal, which meant this picture is probably taken of me when I was 30 years old, 29 or 30 years old. The sassy young lesbian, um, not speaking to my mother. This is her at about the same time. This is her Greta Garbo look. This is another book jacket photo a couple of years later. And this is just a classic picture of my mother during the time we were estranged. This is back to my father on the far left. He's much older, of course. And he's standing there. Next to him is his partner for the last 17 years of his life, Ophelia. I'm on the far right, and Karen, my spouse, is next to me, and baby Eli, our baby, is in the backpack. And this was at Gay Pride in San Francisco. When I came out to my father, his attitude was the total opposite of my mother. His response was, "Let's go march in the Gay Pride parade together." And we marched every year for many, many years until he got too sick to do it. And we would march in the parents and friends of lesbians and gay section. I mean, when it was just starting, just at the very beginning. I always felt so supported by him. This is the same parade earlier when I was younger, and that was a stolen shopping cart. He made that float from. This is Karen and I at Gay Pride in San Francisco. I mean, in Santa Cruz, just a few years ago. This is one of my favorite pictures of her, and you know, I think it's always hard to be the spouse of a writer, or the daughter or son of a writer, or the brother of a writer. I think it's hard to have a memoirist in the family because by necessity you end up getting written about, and I just have to commend all of my immediate family members and my brother for their willingness to be portrayed. because I think it's hard. You know, I'm a public person and they are private. So I really feel a lot of gratitude to my family for allowing this book to be written. This is my brother, Paul, as a little boy. This is a good time between us when we were young adults. He's a big character in the book. This is the two of us at his wedding, and I think there was this point there was already some tension between us. This was, I think, after I believe this was after I had told everyone about the sexual abuse in the family, and he was in a position of trying to be the peacemaker, you know, trying to pacify my mother and then pacify me. And I did not feel supported by that, and that really created a bit of a rift between us as well. This is him today. This is our daughter, Lizzie. Um, the book takes place during her childhood. She was, I think the story starts, she's older than this. She's probably 11 years old, and our middle son Eli is 15. So he was not he left for college pretty soon after Temmie, my mother, arrived in Santa Cruz. So he's not as big a part in the story, but Lizzie was there for the whole thing, and she was very much woven into the story of these generations. This is her, the time she graduated from high school. This is when the story ends. So this was about 7 years ago, and this is you know the time when this story is over. And she was always very loving and sweet to her grandmother. This story, this is a picture of goes back in time. This is my mother, me, and Eli as a baby. And his birth really was a huge impetus for both of us to try to find some way to mend this intractable, embattled relationship that we'd been having for many, many years. And I think I really wanted her as a grandmother, and she really wanted to be a grandmother. And I think more than anything else, this motivated us to work harder at finding some way around the huge differences between us. This is Eli, older. This is Eli visiting his mom's in Santa Cruz at the beach. This is me and my mom when she was in Santa Cruz. We were at the Alzheimer's walk, and I did this, you know, for the years that she was here, and when she was capable, as she was this year, I would take her with me, um, just trying to raise awareness and raise money for this disease that was decimating her life and the lives of so many millions of other people. This is right towards the end of her life. And I want to say something about this is the final picture, and I want to say something about it. Um, I had initially wanted this to be the cover, the book jacket photo. Um, and the book had a different title at that time as well. And when I went to Girl Friday Books, my publisher, they basically said, you know, you're going to need a new title and you're not going to be able to use that photo. I mean, they were quite polite about it. Uh, but this is my seventh book, and I understand that publishers know a lot about marketing and about how to package a story into a book. And so I listened to them. And basically, what they said, and also my coach, Joshua, who had really helped me get over the finish line with the book, said the same thing that people read because they love tension. I mean, people read, they turn pages to see conflict and to see tension being heaped on a character. So things get harder and harder and harder. And then they want the resolution, but only like the last 5%. And so they said, you can't use this photo because it gives away the ending of the story. And so I agreed. And so although I loved the picture, I agreed with them. And we picked a much more ambiguous cover and a much more mysterious title than what I had originally. But I'm showing you this picture because this summer I got it in my mind to submit a 100-word piece to the New York Times for their tiny love stories. And I basically took this 89,000-word memoir, I boiled it down to 100 words, I sent it to them, and like 6 hours later, they wrote back, they said they wanted it. And so they published it in the Sunday Times with this photograph. So I figured since the New York Times published this photo, it was okay for me to show it to you. So, the question might not be, did they get to a place of loving each other? But I think the question I'd like you to ask as you read the book is, how the hell did these two people get from where they were to this?
Thank you so much. That was really fun. What a great show. It's so fun to see your mom's, those photos are just absolutely priceless. Those early ones. And it's always fun to see like, photos out of the past like that could be but when they could be from like old school Hollywood, it just takes it to the next level, so very fun. I encourage everyone who has questions to pop those into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll get started with a couple of questions that I have ready to go, but we'd love to take some from the audience as well. So you can pop those into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And I am thrilled now let's dive into some questions about the cover, which you kind of started talking about in the slideshow, but without giving away too much, can you tell a little bit about the cover and tell us about the gold streak there?
Oh, okay. The gold streak, I really struggled with this cover. I mean, the art that came in, like the first 10 renditions, I was just like, oh my God, I hate this cover, which I think is true of a lot of authors. They hate the covers. But then we came up with this concept, and the gold represents, there's the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is when you take something that's cracked and broken, and you put gold, not to eliminate the crack, but to highlight it. And I think it's that idea that sometimes things that are broken can be mended and even stronger. So that's why the gold crack is on the cover. And it's really only for people who would, not everyone will understand that reference, but for those who do, it will really make sense in terms of the story.
Nice. And what about the title? So you mentioned it had started with a different title, and the folks at Girl Friday kind of is suggested elsewhere. Did you come up with the final title, or how did that work?
No, I did not come up with the final title. The original title was Wholehearted, which I felt like really represented the journey of the protagonist from being kind of shut down and closed-hearted and bitter, not bitter, but just like a coldness, a distance, to becoming more open-hearted. That's her journey. That's her search. But it's Brene Brown uses that word so much in her work. And then I went on to Google, and there were like 12 books called Wholehearted. And someone said to me, you want a title where you own that piece of the internet. If someone Googles that title, yours is the only thing that shows up. And I thought that was really a smart thing. And I actually crowdsourced the title. I posted, because I only had like 2 weeks to come up with a new title. I put it on Facebook, and then I'm in this binders group, like women supporting each other on Facebook, and it was memoir writers. And there's like, I don't know, thousands of people in that group. I got hundreds of suggestions, and they were really overwhelming to get all those ideas. And some of them were even more like on the nose, and and it's, I would like one for a day or two or something like that. And finally, at the very, very last minute, I got a suggestion, actually after the deadline, I got a suggestion from a woman named Karen Bartholomew. And the thing that's remarkable about her, she was a former student of mine, but what's really amazing is that she is a nurse in Santa Cruz, and she had been my mother's visiting nurse. So she knew Temmie, my mother. And she was the one at the last minute. She goes, how about the burning light of two stars? Because I had said there's a lot of heat references in the book. And so I wrote to the publisher, and they said, that's it. And
Wow.
at first I couldn't even remember the title, but now I absolutely love it. I just think it's the perfect title for this book.
Wow. That's amazing. I wonder if that nurse has come to any of Miss Bartholomew's at any of your events, because that's really
I don't know. She could be here tonight. I don't know if she is or
yay.
not.
Well, what a great title. Thank you. We had a question come in. Do you surprise yourself now by thinking of and being haunted by new questions you wish you'd asked your mother?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, I would say not really. I mean, I think the thing about watching someone, this book is about a lot of things, but it's about caretaking someone who has dementia. And it's really about what is it like to become a caregiver to someone who betrayed you in the past. I mean, this is something that millions of people face all the time. And it's part of why I wrote the book is, what do you do in that situation? And what does it take? It's already incredibly challenging to be a caregiver. And when you, on top of that, you add a difficult history, um, how that complicates things. So when you have someone having dementia, you're basically losing them a little by little by little. And there were a lot of things I couldn't ask my mother in the last years of her life, not just after she died. And so, I think the process really was grieving her um, for a long time, for years, just gradually losing her, watching her lose her faculties. Um, it's excruciating. And anyone who has been through that with a parent or a spouse or anyone who's going through it themselves, it's just, I just can't imagine anything worse. The other thing is that her decline was a real trigger for me because some of the symptoms of dementia, especially in the early stages, which can involve like rage and anxiety and explosive behavior, it just triggered all the worst qualities of her that had um, been so difficult for me as a child and growing up. So um, I I went from feeling like we had successfully reconciled to suddenly really, really struggling. And that's a lot of what the book is about, is what I had to do to become the daughter she needed me to be and the daughter I wanted to be.
Beautiful answer. Thank you. Question from Pam here. Did you ever feel protective of your children in any way since your mother did not protect you when you were young?
I was protective. I really worked to try not to be overly protective because I think a lot of abuse survivors can either go in one direction of being negligent and just it, kind of repeating the cycle of not protecting their children, and others can go in the other direction of being like hyper overprotective. So I was aware of that. I tried to take the middle course. You'll have to ask them what they think. I can't really answer for them.
Right, totally. And we have some questions here about the favorite feedback that you've gotten from early readers so far.
Um, I think my favorite, well, I've gotten some really interesting feedback. I mean, uh, people who've said things like, I'm thinking about my relationship with my mother or my daughter in a whole new way. Or I know I'm going to be taking care of my mother, and I've thought about it as a burden, and now I'm thinking of it as an opportunity. Um, and one woman said to me, she said, Laura, I picked up the phone and called my mother for the first time in 18 years. So I mean, you can't pay for those kind of responses. So those, and the other response I'm getting the most is, I got your book, I read it in 24 hours. I read all night. I couldn't put it down. So those are great responses, both in terms of the craft of the book and also the emotional impact. And I wanted this book to touch people who are dealing with an estranged relationship, and there's so much of that. There's always a lot of it, but right now there's so much divisiveness in our country. There's so many people who are polarized within their families, and I feel like what my mother and I achieved from where we started, I hope it will be an inspiration that reconciliation is possible and it does not have to be perfect.
Wow. Well, that's actually kind of a perfect note to end on, I think. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a lot to take in and so much beauty here tonight. And so I know it's been a long road to the actual day when it's on the shelves, but can't think of a better place for it to be than at Bookshop Santa Cruz. We have signed copies, and I'm so thrilled you came in and signed for, gosh, like 2 hours the other day. So we have a lot of signed copies, and also we are so grateful to be able to offer personalization as well, which is now up and available. Wasn't initially, but we have that now. Do you want to mention anything else about just the process of how this has come to be? Any other final thoughts tonight?
Yeah, there's a few things I'd like to say. One is, if you're here at this event and this event is moving to you and you enjoyed it and you do not yet have a copy of the book, please buy it from Bookshop Santa Cruz. It's kind of heartbreaking when someone comes to an event like this and then clicks on Amazon and buys the book to save a few bucks, because independent stores really, really need our support to survive. So that's the first thing. And if you liked my reading, and I did the audiobook myself, I recorded it. So if you would like to hear the book, the audiobook is available. And for those of you who don't know, there is an alternative to Audible. Audible is an Amazon company, but there's also a company called Libro FM. And that's a way to get your audiobooks and support independent bookstores. So in our family, we changed over a couple of years ago from Audible when we learned about Libro FM, and I just feel better about myself buying my audiobooks there. So that's what I wanted to say. Also, you're going to get a letter after the reading. It'll be from Zoom, and don't just disregard it, because in that letter, I included some things. I included a way to join my mailing list, some information about my writing workshops and classes, a trip I'm taking people to Tuscany. And also, if you're the kind of person who likes to read before you buy, I've posted the first 5 chapters of the book on my website, and you'll be getting a link in that letter how to access those chapters. I just really want to thank everyone who came tonight. This is a really emotional thing for me. To not have published a book in 19 years. And in part, it's because I felt I was not allowed to tell this story, that I had to be silent to keep peace in my extended family. And there's a price to writing a memoir. And I decided I would pay that price and publish this book. And it's just thrilling to feel the support of my community, my friends, my colleagues, my students, my family, my kids, my wife. It just feels amazing. So thank you for being here. There's nothing like the event at Bookshop Santa Cruz when you're launching a book. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, I can't wait to see you again in the next couple of days to find more books probably. And it's been such a joy. So yeah, keep an eye out, folks, for that email. It'll come from Zoom. It'll have a lot of good stuff in it, as well as the link to the recording. And happy reading. Thank you.
Oh yeah, so I'll say one more thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feel free to share the recording. If you like this event, pass it on. That's one of the real beauties of a digital event. I mean, I don't get to sign books in person, which is a loss, but the event can be shared beyond just those who could attend today. So please feel free to pass it on.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye.